it's been a lot of fun to build this, but also probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, right? Because a startup is a very fragile thing, right? I think somebody described a startup or running a startup as standing on the edge of a cliff. And for every good decision, you get to take a step backwards. And for every bad decision, you have to take a step forwards.
So welcome to this week's episode of Leaders on a Mission. I'm your host, Simon Leach, and this week we're going to be talking all about the interesting world of precision fermentation. Now, precision fermentation is transforming food, really enabling us to produce kind of real proteins without the animals at a fraction of the environmental footprint. Now, I'm really pumped because my guest today is Stephan van Sint Fiet, CEO of Vivici. Now, Vivici are a company really at the forefront of this shift. You know, they've been backed by biotech leaders, DSM, Firmenich, and Fonterra. And Vivici are really rethinking about how we make food at scale. And in this episode, we're going to talk all about the science and the scaling and what it really takes to build a biotech company that could change the future of protein. So, Stephan, thanks so much for sparing your time and coming on the show today.
My pleasure, Simon. Thanks for having me.
And maybe we'll start with, give us, I mean, you've been around the biotech industry for, a number of years. Maybe give some context to, what led to you joining Vivici. What was the, what were the real kind of motivations for you joining?
Yeah, so like you said, I've been in the biotech industry for a while, and I was always drawn to it because I saw biotech as a force for good. Sustainable processes, the ability to, develop environmental friendly processes and products. I was always drawn to that. I think when I started to learn about the impact of food on our global resources and the footprint that this has compared to, say, transportation or other things that we often look at when we look at footprint and resources. And once you see the scope of that and the scale of that, you can't unsee those numbers, right? So once I realized that food had such a tremendous impact, I became interested in the protein transition as well. And what would that take? And cellular agriculture, and where's that technology at? And, who are active in the field? And I was really drawn into that. And so when the opportunity came to build Vivici and really take a stab at this from a protein transition perspective, I was all in.
Awesome. Tell me a little bit more about what were those facts? What were the numbers that really kind of resonate with you, as it were?
Yes. So a couple of facts, right? I mean, the global demand for protein for human consumption is going to double over the next couple of years until 2050. That's partially driven by population growth, but also by the growth of our affluence. As we become more affluent, we tend to add more animal protein to our diet, right? So overall, that leads to a forecasted doubling of protein demand by 2050. But what we know for sure is that the planet's resources won't double by 2050. In fact, in some of the aspects of resources, we're already maxing out. In terms of land use, we're above 70. Freshwater use, we're above 70%. In terms of emissions, it's already 1/3 of the emissions that are derived from the global food system. So you can see that that's a system that's already today a massive burden on the world's resources. And there simply isn't a future scenario in which we double all of that and get away with it with the resources that are sustainably available to us. And so you can immediately see whether you look at this ideologically or pragmatically, you can immediately see this is a system headed for the wall, right? And you will need alternative sources of protein, and they have to come from somewhere. And so this is really the moment when you start looking at cellular agriculture as one contributor to the solution.
It's fascinating. And for someone like yourself, because you've been in the biotech space, for 20 odd years, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you go all the way back to enzyme days and Novozymes and you've got your education is in biotech, right? As it were.
My background is in science. I'm a biotechnologist, and I was lucky to work for some really cool companies that are active in the space. You mentioned Novozymes that are pioneers in the enzyme space. That whether it's in the food space or biofuel space or household personal care, animal nutrition, a lot of applications of enzymes that have come out and have had really measurable positive impacts, right? Spent some time with Evolva, an early biosynthetic company, looking at how to engineer yeast to make complex molecules by biosynthetic pathways. Think about flavors or antimicrobial compounds, and always fascinated with the ability of microorganisms to put an entire building of organic chemists to shame, right? With their ability to make things and make them so elegantly and efficiently, right? And so, when I put one and one together, which is basically, you're looking at the food system, and we're really looking at a major growth problem, a major resource problem, and the ability of cellular agriculture to increasingly deliver on the needs of the food system. It's sort of logical to then say, okay, let's shift away from making micronutrients or flavors or enzymes, and shift that towards macronutrients like proteins and fats and oils and all the other ingredients that you now see being made by precision fermentation. And so to me, that is a step change in what industrial biotech is capable of doing. And it's exciting because I think this is right here, right now, this is the time when it's happening, when we're cracking that.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it? And tell us a little bit then, with Vivici, like specifically, what are you what problems are you looking to solve as it relates to, say markets that you want to kind of go after, and particular kind of proteins you want to kind of create, as it were?
Yeah, so we focused on dairy proteins for a couple of reasons, right? To a certain extent, they're Mother Nature's best nutrition. There's a reason we all start our lives with dairy, right? Because they pack a nutritious punch, and they're, from a functional perspective, wonderful wonderful ingredients, whether it's the sugars or the milk proteins and so on, and you have both nutritionally and functionally an enormous potential there. So if you're going to look for ways of supporting the protein transition and looking for nutritious proteins that also are fabulous from a functional perspective, very quickly you arrive at dairy proteins. And so that was the focus of Vivici from the start. And so our mission is quite simple. Our mission is to make the promise of dairy proteins from precision fermentation a commercial reality.
Got it.
And the reason that I'm emphasizing the commercial reality is because it already is a technological reality, and we know we can make these proteins in the lab, and they're fabulous, right? You can purify them, and they are functionally and nutritionally outstanding ingredients. The trick is to do it at scale, and the trick is to do it in an economically viable way, because only if you succeed with that, you can scale that up and have the kind of positive environmental impact or positive impact on the protein transition that you're looking to have.
Yeah, no, awesome. And maybe we'll just we'll dive a little bit into that, because, the challenge really is around, as you've mentioned, the scale and the economic kind of viability of it. So tell us a little bit around that path, because it's a challenge, isn't it? It's a challenge to kind of commercialize and be cost competitive, because you're competing against quite low value commodity products out there, right? That are pretty cheap, I would have thought.
Animal agriculture has been optimized for many centuries, and is today very, very efficient. It's also heavily subsidized, right? So that's kind of the industry that we're competing against here. I think the starting point really is looking for the kind of high quality, nutritionally and functionally high quality proteins that the market really is looking for. And our focus was to begin with market segments where we felt consumers were looking for the highest quality protein in their diets and willing to pay for it, and also had a certain understanding of the protein that they were purchasing. And so that led us to a somewhat maybe unintuitive go-to-market strategy, which is to start not with dairy alternatives and pursue the milks and the cream cheeses and the yogurts, but to start with sports and active nutrition, where you have consumers that are looking for protein to support their active lifestyles, where you have consumers that are looking to increase their protein intake, whether it's because the elderly population that's looking for more protein, or whether it's the athlete, or whether it's somebody who's pre or post medical operation. So all kinds of reasons why people are looking for premium protein in their diet and are looking for for health and wellness type of products that satisfy that need for high quality protein in their diet. And so that is much easier to take to market, because now, instead of going after the very large but very price sensitive segments, you're going after slightly more selective but more premium segments, right?
Got it. Yeah.
And I would say that high quality protein is something that today I wouldn't exactly call it a commodity, right? Many markets are shaped as a pyramid, if you will, with sort of commodity basis and then slightly more premium and then super premium at the top. And dairy protein markets are shaped in exactly that way. And so we're targeting the premium segments of this protein market in order to facilitate market entry, but at the same time looking for those big markets to have an impact on the protein transition. So we're not taking the route that you see some other companies take, where they kind of shy away from the really big ingredients and go after very, very specialty proteins instead. I think that's a wonderful strategy if what you're looking to make are small volumes of specialty proteins, right?
Yes.
It's extremely lucrative. But if you're looking to impact the way that we globally consume protein, and you really want to put a dent into that protein transition, you have to go after the big stuff, right? And so you have to bring the cost of manufacturing down low enough, but you have to be smart and start at the premium end of the market and not immediately go to the sort of largest but most price sensitive.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, that's probably a lesson over the last 20 years that many companies have learned, right? Just broadly across the biotech sector. In fact, you probably saw that most from about 2008, 2010 onwards, really, after that kind of biofuels kind of bubble burst in, I suppose, Biotech 1.0, maybe, something along those lines. So that makes perfect sense. And so the protein you start with, it's a beta-lactoglobulin. Am I pronouncing it right?
That is right, 100%.
Excellent. And so tell us a little bit about it. It's great that you actually have that as published information. Not everyone puts down the specific nature of what they're, it can be quite a secretive field, right? So it was great to be able to read a little bit about it and research the protein itself. So maybe to tell us a little bit about that. Why did you start with that? What makes it the right first product, maybe from a scientific and commercial perspective?
Yeah, happy to do so. And on your comment on that, we're sharing all of that. I think if you're entering the field of food, it's a business that is based on trust, right? If we want to be successful with our ingredients, we have to build trust with customers and consumers, and that means that we have to be transparent, and that means that we have to set the bar high from quality perspective, from a regulatory perspective, and also be very open and honest in our communication. And so we try to publish on a regular basis blogs about the science that we do, about the ingredients, about the functionality, and we go quite deep into the science, and it's our scientists, in fact, who write most of the content, right? And so we really believe in building trust through transparency. So absolutely.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So back to your question, why beta-lactoglobulin, right? Again, back to, if you look at what kind of protein are you going to bring to market to positively impact the protein transition? And you're looking for something that is nutritious, that has great functionality, that is broadly applicable. Very quickly, you arrive at, like I said, at dairy proteins. And then within dairy proteins, there's that group of whey proteins, right? Beta-lactoglobulin is actually the main whey protein. And if you isolate that in its pure form, you get a protein that actually confers as an ingredient most of the nutritional and functional benefits of whey powder onto the product in which it is used. So it's a great starting point to say that's the main whey protein, that's the one we're going after, because that packs all the nutritional and functional punch that we expect. And it is a protein that today has a very large existing market, right? It's about a 3 million metric tons a year market, the whey protein market. It's absolutely enormous, and it's used in many different applications, from sort of the obvious ones like for example whey powders for sports nutrition or bars. But also in beverages, also in processed meat, also in various other applications that you wouldn't think that whey powder is used, and it's always used for its functionality or nutritional purposes, whether it's the protein content as such, or its emulsification power, or its foaming power, or its gelling power. So, like I said, it's such a versatile ingredient that if you're going to start somewhere, this is a great place to start.
Yeah, no, great. And so how do you compete against a 3 million metric kind of ton market? Is it the from a functional viewpoint, or from a is it a superior? Can you make it so it's a superior product, or maybe tell us a little bit about that. How you compete with
the starting point, we believe, is if we look at consumers, like many consumers are willing to sort of take the perceived sustainability performance of a brand into consideration when they make a purchase, but they won't compromise on things like taste, nutrition, and ultimately affordability as well, right? So we see sustainability really more as a table stakes and not as the main differentiator, right? So fundamentally, where we have to get to in order to make these type of dairy proteins a mainstream ingredient is to price parity with dairy derived milk proteins, right? That's where we need to get to, and so. You can, when you create a pure ingredient, you can find ways of differentiating the product and looking for that potential to premiumize, but it's never going to get the consumer to pay 2x or 3x what they're used to paying, right?
Yeah.
You're really talking at differentiation in specific end-use segments where you have a slightly higher willingness to pay. But if you want to go mainstream with these ingredients, you have to hit price parity. And so ultimately, that's what the supply chains, what the technology need to arrive at.
Got it. Okay, no, great. Thank you. And you talk about the growth broadly in the protein market. You said doubling by 2050. When you look at the marketplace and the demand for this particular the lactoglobulin marketplace, how has that developed over the last kind of few years? I'm thinking particularly since maybe, like 2021 when we had the kind of protein explosion when everyone was kind of talking about it, right? How has that market evolved?
You're absolutely right. There's this protein in everything trend, right?
Yeah.
Like people have really become aware of the nutritional contribution of protein and are now really looking for ways to add protein to their diet through many different products. So that protein in everything trend is definitely there. Look, like I said, the global demand for protein is increasing. Currently, whey protein is at an all-time high from a price perspective. Supply chains are really tight. We're hearing from customers who are basically unable to meet their customers' demand because they can't get their hands on enough whey protein. And so it's a great time to step into this business and add on that capacity. It kind of confirms the thesis that I started with, that how are we going to support that growth if we're going to a doubling protein demand over the next 2 decades? That growth has to be supported somehow. And so cellular agriculture is ready to be that complementary source and absorb some of that growth, and that's exactly what we're seeing today.
Awesome, yeah, great. And maybe tell us a little bit about maybe some of the milestones that have really helped confirm you on the right path.
I think the most important thing is that our customers tell us that they love our product and they love working with Vivici. And I think that is really, really great to hear. I mean, from a product perspective, we do our best to deliver the highest quality dairy protein to the market. We've benchmarked our product extensively. And we believe it is a very high quality product, perhaps even one of the highest quality dairy proteins out there. And then we try our best to support our customers with our food science and our formulation know-how. And so that combination of great product and great science and great support to help the customer get the most out of the ingredient translates into that sort of feedback from the customers. And so that's the fundament upon which we're building things. Then I think the financial markets have funded Vivici and sort of expressed their confidence in Vivici's team to actually execute on the mission. So I think that's a major important milestone and sort of expresses the confidence of the market in the strategy of Vivici, in the team of Vivici, and the execution so far. I think from a sheer executional perspective, the big milestones that you want to hit are getting your protein production to food grade, getting your first regulatory approvals, getting your process scaled up, getting the cost of goods down to a level where this becomes economically viable. And these are milestones that Vivici has been hitting over the last couple of years, which really enable us now to take this protein and to scale up its production and to offer it to the market in higher volumes and really deliver on our mission to have a positive impact on the protein transition.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. It sounds like it's been a really busy time over the last few years with things, and I think your fundraise you kind of closed, or the news came out, I think it was in January, right, this year?
Yes, yeah.
So it was one of the kind of highlights, really, I think, of the European biotech, food biotech sectors. So great to see. And what was also interesting was some really interesting sources of support that you received, as it were. I couldn't help but notice pension funds, or the impact side of quite a large pension fund supporting you on the journey as well. So I thought some of those larger pension funds maybe shied away from early stage kind of investments. So it was great to see. It was great to see that, actually. And I hadn't recognized that name before or seen it necessarily involved in on the investment side. So what was that process like for you, going through probably the first time, right? for a while, I would have thought you've been through this funding process,
Yeah,
right?
we had closed a sizable seed round already in 2023, and we went out for our Series A in 2024. It was a very difficult time to raise funds. So it took a little bit longer than we anticipated, and we saw, our peers left and right. We saw them struggle with the fundraising. So, we're definitely thrilled that we succeeded. It wasn't at an easy moment when we were able to raise those funds. I think to the point of the pension fund that you mentioned, we're thrilled to have them on board. I think what we're seeing here is capital that is now being deployed in Europe to really drive a key industry forward and innovation forward in a key industry. That has always been one of the challenges for European biotechs, right? Getting their hands on sufficient funding, especially when they grow out of the early startup days and are becoming a scale up. And I would classify Vivici today as a scale up, right? And so seeing pension funds stepping in, looking for impact investments is fantastic. So this particular investor has an impact investment arm. They have been very active already on the energy transition side of things and became more and more interested in food and the protein transition. And Vivici actually was their first investment in the food space. So we were thrilled about that. But at the end of the day, they are financial investors. So their lens first and foremost was, is this a sound financial investment or not? And second, of course, are we having the kind of positive impact with this investment that we're looking to have, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that seeing players like that enter the scene is really good news for European biotechs.
Absolutely. And do we think there's more, more access to this type of capital out there?
I would hope so. I think APG, who was our lead investor, is certainly leading by example there. And I would hope that we're seeing more and more of these kind of investments coming through.
Yeah, no, awesome. That's great to hear. And sometimes you think about in the comparison between maybe the US and Europe, and in Europe, there is a really rich heritage, across Europe in this biotech, right? Some of the kind of companies out there that have led the way, slightly, I won't say under the radar, but maybe we don't shout about things as much in Europe, as it were. It just seems that maybe with, Europe is kind of poised. It just seems to be quite a lot of support and momentum behind the sector over in Europe, actually. Is that your sense as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree, Simon. I think on your comment about heritage, I think, in Europe, you see many strong industrial biotech companies that have grown to be really international players. I think much of that is sort of a heritage of, sort of the early beer brewing and the early baking and the early ethanol production where we were starting to tinker with yeast. And you have companies like Carlsberg and Heineken and others that sort of got that going. And I think there's a rich heritage of knowing how to industrialize microorganisms and get all sorts of wonderful products out of them, and a lot of skilled people in this space as well, right? I mean, the talent, the biotech talent in Europe is enormous, right? Whether it's more the food biotech as a space that we're active in, or whether it's the life sciences. So I think Europe has all the heritage, the talent, and the companies to succeed, right? It's about really taking those ingredients and not giving that lead away, but being really conscious about the importance that biotech can have for the European economy, and really continuing to support that now. And I think that's definitely something what we're seeing. I think the European Union has also labeled biotech as one of the three strategic industries. We're seeing more and more programs to support biotech companies, not just in the startup stage, but also in the scale-up stage. There's more and more an understanding of the kind of financial support and regulatory support, and ultimately also seeing the industrialization through in Europe. I think Europe is really stepping things up, and I think it's necessary, right? I think this is a fabulous industry that is driving a lot of value, but is also important from a food self-sufficiency perspective. So I think all good reasons to make sure that Europe leverages its talent and heritage to keep the lead here.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think the challenges are? I mean, look, it's interesting with precision fermentation, right? And the journey of it over the last few years in terms of, a lot of excitement, from a scientific viewpoint, what you can create. And the challenge has always been, scaling biology or bringing it to scale requiring maybe lots of capex and lots of, investment in facilities, as it were. Where you are now, where do you see the main challenges for Vivici in really being able to kind of achieve your kind of broader goals?
It's interesting that you say that, right? Because industrial biotech and precision fermentation are really 30, 40 years old already, right? And you have several large international players that are putting food ingredients out there. I think there's 70 or 80 different food ingredients that are today made at large scale by fermentation. And so there definitely is a playbook out there of how to research this, how to scale it, how to implement it on an industrial scale. And so this is not new, right? But the let's say the startup space has sort of rediscovered this space, and in some instances is trying to reinvent the wheel. Whereas I think that industrial biotech playbook works perfectly well. Where it falls short is that you need to cut across some of these cost barriers, and you need to try and find efficiencies in how you make things. So that's where innovation is absolutely needed. But for the most part, that industrial playbook really, really works. So it's to a certain extent, for somebody who's been in that industry for 20 years and then jumps into this alternative protein startup environment, it's almost a bit amusing to see that people are trying to reinvent the wheel when there's an industry who's been executing on that since 30 or 40 years, right?
Yes.
But having said that, I think what we're doing at Vivici is trying to leverage the team's experience in industrial biotech, bring that to the table, and apply some of these playbooks that we know that are successful. So, to your question, I don't think that the biotech or the scale up or any of that is really that particularly challenging, because there's, like I said, there are playbooks that simply work. I think the most challenging part for alternative proteins like ours made by precision fermentation is consumer adoption. Is creating wonderful products that consumers love. It's explaining them what this protein, what it does, and what all the benefits are in a way that they embrace it. I think that's the final frontier. The supply chain bit, the strains, the scale up, the regulatory bit, all of that is solved already, because we have an industry that's been executing on that since 30, 40 years.
Fascinating. Yeah. I was always thinking about the precision side as being more engineered organisms, as it were. But no, it's great to hear your point about that. And I love the point, really interesting on the consumer acceptance side of things, because I think over the last few years we have this kind of polarizing opinion, right? You had all of a sudden the benefits of the sustainability benefits of, like, if you think about meat, for instance, sustainability of things like meat, but then you had the challenges around maybe processed food and against the natural kind of component of the way food is made. And People that didn't know around, science and, using science to create these proteins. It is a challenge. So where do you think we are on that journey of consumer acceptance, and how do you think that will pan out?
I think both of these things that you're describing are true. There's definitely a trend of consumers seeking less processed food, fewer ingredients, and we sort of describe that as the clean label trend, right? People look on the back of the packs of the products that they're buying, and if there are a lot of ingredients or ingredients whose names they cannot pronounce, they don't want the product, and so that's a trend that's been consistently there in the food industry now for I think 1 or 2 decades, right? So everybody who's making consumer products is looking to simplify the composition, to process less. And so that's something that we're fitting in quite nicely, because if you make ingredients by precision fermentation, you can make the real animal protein without the animal agriculture contribution there. And so actually you are creating an ingredient that has less of a compromise, right? And because now you're using the real animal protein with the real functionality and nutritional benefits, you need less additives in your final product to compensate the inefficiencies or the suboptimal nutritional or functional attributes, as we sometimes see with plant, right? I mean, plant proteins are a wonderful solution to bringing more sustainable protein into the food supply chain. But in many cases, they're terrible ingredients. And so that's where you often have a need to work with all sorts of additives to get the product to be somewhat acceptable to consumers, right? And that's where you get a lot of complex labels then with many ingredients. I think with cellular agriculture, you in fact sidestep that, right? And so you can serve multiple consumer needs, the need for more protein in their diet, for more nutritious, healthy protein in their diet, the need for less additives and a cleaner label product, but also the need to do right when buying a product and look for the more sustainable choice. So in that sense, we fit right in with those consumer trends.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's great to hear the difference and your context around this. And what about the European marketplace? I know the US is clearly you can get regulated and get into the US a lot quicker, right? As a marketplace than somewhere like Europe, I would have thought. How do you think the legislation will evolve or change in Europe to help to help in the commercialization of these over in Europe?
I think the legislation in Europe is actually fine. And basically, we have regulation that stipulates when an ingredient is a novel food, right? And then that novel food is assessed for its safety, and it's done so by EFSA in Europe. And EFSA has a lot of specialists that are very capable in assessing whether a novel food is safe for consumption by European consumers. So that whole regulatory framework, in fact, is fine. I don't think that the novel food guidelines are particularly complex or cumbersome. There is a challenge in the timelines and the execution or implementation of that, right? Right now, these regulatory timelines are rather long. They're longer than they need be, and that's partially a novelty issue. That's partially a bandwidth issue also of the EFSA, right? And it just has very, very practical reasons. So I would actually say, as a European consumer, I support strict safety standards. I don't want companies and regulators to cut corners. We want safe proteins. We want safe ingredients in the food supply chain. But the time to get to a decision on whether an ingredient is safe or not, that needs to be a whole lot shorter, right? And you have countries that demonstrate that already, that set very strict safety guidelines. but still manage to have a very short process from application to decision for the ingredient. I would name Singapore as an example, where typically you have a timeline of 12 to 18 months after you submit, your application that has a lot of safety relevant information in it, and then you can enter the market. Whereas in Europe, this tends to take 3 to 4 years, which is I think longer than it need be. But I don't think it's a problem of the legislation or the regulation. I think it's a problem in implementation, and that's good news, because that's much easier to solve, right, than sort of going back through the whole legislative process.
Got it. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, no, great. Thank you for the education. I really, really appreciate it, actually. And how have you found being a CEO? And it's a very different kind of role. And how's your journey been? For a startup and then scaling up a company. What have been the big differences for a role like this for you?
Yeah, so it's funny that you ask. I mean, this is now the fifth company I work in, and it's been 2 startups, 2 corporates, and this is the 5th one. So back to startup, right? So I've sort of seen both sides of the fence, and I'm enjoying the speed at which we can run. Enjoying the agility. The ability to really build a company from scratch and build a team from scratch, and sort of get it as optimal as you can. I'm enjoying the fact that we've built a wonderful experienced team around Vivici that brings a lot of experience and know-how from industrial biotech, from food ingredients, from various consumer brands to the table. So I'm very proud of the team that we've been able to build. But the other thing is that we are all very much aligned on the mission. We all really care, and I think that shows in the day-to-day. And it's been a lot of fun to build this, but also probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, right? Because a startup is a very fragile thing, right? I think somebody described a startup or running a startup as standing on the edge of a cliff. And for every good decision, you get to take a step backwards. And for every bad decision, you have to take a step forwards. And I think that's a beautiful analogy, because that's exactly how it feels sometimes. You're building something, and it's a very rewarding journey, but you're always somehow near death, right? You're always very aware that this is a very fragile construct that you're building.
Yeah, no, I love that analogy. Thank you very much. That's great. And I really appreciate you coming on today. I could talk to you all day about this. It's a fascinating company and area that you work in, and but it's been a delight to have you on the show. Big thank you, Stephan, for coming on, talking about this journey. And it's a very exciting, systematic kind of change we're going through here with this kind of protein transition. So I wish you all the very best for the future. Really enjoyed the company, hearing about the company and your journey. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on the show, Simon.
Yeah, a pleasure. And if you enjoyed the conversation, please be sure to follow and share the show, and we'll see you on next week's show.